So today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating paper from the National Defense University's PRISM Journal. It's called What the Red Dragon Fears. And it asks a pretty simple question. What is China's single greatest vulnerability? The answer, it might not be what you think. When we think of China, this is usually the image that pops into our heads, right? An immense, powerful dragon. We focus on its incredible economic might, its rapidly growing military, the fire and the scales. It's an image of pure external strength, almost mythical. But the paper we're digging into today poses a really powerful question. If this is the image of strength that China projects to the world, what is the Chinese Communist Party's deepest, darkest vulnerability? Well, it turns out the answer isn't what you'd expect at all. The paper argues that the CCP's greatest fear isn't some foreign army massing on its borders. No, it's an internal memory. It's this, the iconic Tankman of 1989. This image, which is famously scrubbed from the Chinese internet, represents the ultimate threat, resistance from within. It's a fear of its own people. Okay, so to really understand this internal fear, first we have to figure out the strength of the CCP's control, what the paper calls its resilience. Think of it like the dragon's armor. Just how strong is it, really? And the paper gives us a very specific definition for resilience. See, it's not just about military power or economic strength. It's the party's ability to overcome any challenge, whether that's a protest at home or pressure from abroad. This is the yardstick we're going to use to measure its true stability. So when you actually average 9 different governance metrics, China's overall resilience score comes out to about 51%. Now, that's not exactly weak. It's actually pretty much on par with India. But it still lags way behind regional democracies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. But here it is. This is the crucial point. Buried inside that average score is this number. According to World Bank data that's cited in the paper, China ranks at just 7.35% for government accountability. That's it. This is the single biggest chink in the dragon's armor, an incredibly low score in how accountable the government is perceived to be by its own people. So that huge lack of accountability, well, it creates an opening, right? So let's take a look at how this builds into the potential for actual resistance, the cracks that are forming from inside the armor itself. The CCP is always pushing this idea of a unified one China, but the reality is the country is unbelievably diverse. And while there's significant ethnic and linguistic diversity, that religion metric, wow, it's stunning. China is one of the most religiously diverse nations on the entire planet. Each one of these is a potential societal fault line that challenges that centralized control. And another major fracture is economic inequality. Get this. In a state that's supposed to be communist, the top 1% holds nearly as much wealth as the entire bottom 50%. The paper argues that this kind of massive disparity is a huge source of potential discontent, just waiting to bubble up. So, if that potential for resistance is there, who are the actual faces of that dissent? Let's look at the groups and movements that really embody this challenge to the CCP. The paper actually maps out all these resistance movements on a continuum. And what it shows is that the opposition isn't just one big, unified thing. No. It ranges all the way from nonviolent protest to outright belligerency. So let's look at the key players on that spectrum. On the nonviolent end, you've got pro-democracy activists and religious groups like the Tibetan monks and Falun Gong. Somewhere in the middle, there are insurgent groups like the East Turkestan Islamic Movement. And then way over on the far end, classified as a belligerent, is the Republic of China, who we all know better as Taiwan. Now, the paper dedicates a lot of time to Taiwan, and it argues that it represents the most profound and persistent challenge of them all. So let's dive into why that is. So here's the crucial point. The threat from Taiwan isn't just military, it's ideological. As the author says, it represents a compelling countervision. It's living proof that a free, democratic, and culturally Chinese society can not only exist, but it can thrive. And this chart really puts the physical conflict into perspective. Just look at the staggering asymmetry here. The PRC's official military budget absolutely dwarfs Taiwan's. This isn't a conflict of equals. It is a true David versus Goliath scenario, which frankly is why that ideological battle is so incredibly important. So to sum it all up, Taiwan's very existence serves as a constant, living, breathing rebuke to the CCP's claim that its authoritarian model is the only path forward for China.
It is, as the paper concludes, a persistent manifestation of the CCP's dread.
Okay, so given this whole analysis of China's internal fears, what does that actually mean for the rest of the world? Well, the paper outlines 3 potential strategic paths for foreign powers to take. Okay, option 1, support the CCP's resilience. The idea here is that if we just continue economic engagement, it'll eventually lead to liberalization. Option 2 is the exact opposite. Actively support resistance movements to challenge the CCP's legitimacy. And then there's option 3, which is kind of the wait-and-see approach. Prepare the environment, but don't commit to either side just yet.
And here's the final, and maybe the most fascinating insight from the whole paper. If you really want to know what the CCP fears most, you don't actually have to guess. They've basically told the world themselves. The paper points to what President Xi has called his 4 red lines for the United States. But instead of seeing them as a list of demands, the author argues we should read them as a confession. Every single red line points directly to one of the CCP's greatest vulnerabilities: Taiwan's independence, human rights for minority groups, challenges to its political system, and economic instability. It's all right there.
And all of this leaves us with a final, absolutely crucial question. The entire argument of this paper suggests that we might be looking at China's power all wrong. So if the dragon's greatest fear isn't a foreign army, but the will of its own people, how does that change everything?